Anybody ever failed? Well, once again, we come to a failure in the life of the nation of Israel, but in particular, Joshua as the leader. But my next question is, aren't you glad that God didn't record your failures for the whole world to have? I mean, think about that. I mean, here Joshua is. He's trying his best, the poor guy. He's coming after Moses, Israel's greatest leader. Everybody's like, yeah, Mo, he's our man. Oh, yeah, okay, now we got Josh. Where are we going? And, the questions that are there. And then, every mistake he makes, God records it for us. Well, this is no different. They're here recorded, but I believe God did that for a reason. To encourage us to learn and to grow from Joshua's mistakes, so that maybe we wouldn't make as many mistakes as Joshua did. And so today what we're going to look at is really the exposure of instant gratification. Instant gratification, it just kind of rolls off your tongue, doesn't it? It's just one of those statements that seems to be what motivates our world and drives our world, isn't it? You can have it now. You can have it your way. You can, you know the slogans that are out there. It's what the world uses as its marketing scheme to get us. But what we're going to see today is that there's a pitfall. There's a downside to instant gratification. And what we're going to see is really what that looks like, because Joshua made the mistake of giving in to instant gratification. That being said, what I don't want you to do is do nothing, because here's what I'm finding is that there's two camps. Like, I don't want to make mistakes, so I'll just do nothing, rather than I don't want to make mistakes, and so I'm going to do the necessary things so that I can assure myself that I'll make more informed and educated decisions and I'll be less likely to make mistakes. It's like we go to two extremes. It's either nothing or, all in and just who cares. But in Joshua's case here, doing nothing was actually his mistake. And that's what we're going to find out. And this chapter 9, explains what happened. And somebody said, I can't remember who it was, but they said it's important to remain prepared after a victory as much as it was before the battle. And oftentimes we prepare for the battle, but we don't prepare for victory. And so what I'm hoping we do today is prepare for life after the victories that we sang about, the victories that we're hoping for. And so what I want to do is I want to take some time and examine the effects of instant gratification, that we might be prepared when we're faced with choices. And so the first thing that we're going to see in the first 6 verses is that instant gratification demands a quick response. So you'll see what I mean. Verse 1, and it came to pass when all the kings who were on this side of the Jordan, in the hills and in the lowlands, and all the coasts of the great sea towards Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, heard about it, that they gathered together to fight with Joshua and Israel with one accord. I find this fascinating, because on any other given day, those 5 guys that were mentioned did not get along. They weren't friends. They weren't buddies. They weren't going out to lunch or coffee. No, they were enemies. And this region was made up, the region of Canaan was made up with all these different city-states that had the leaders of these city-states, and that's what we have here. And they weren't always friendly with one another, but it's amazing to me what happens and how one could be unified when they have a common enemy. And here they have that. They have a common enemy in Joshua and the Lord and what God is doing. It goes on, it says, but when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they worked craftily and went and pretended to be ambassadors, and they took old sacks on their donkeys, old wineskins torn and mended, old and patched sandals on their feet and old garments on themselves. And all the bread of their provision was dry and moldy. And they went to Joshua to the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the men of Israel, "We have come from a far country. Now, therefore, make a covenant with us." The Gibeonites, they didn't join with these other guys. They were like, you know what? I'm not sure that I want to fight with Israel. I've seen what's happened, and it didn't fare well for those guys. Well, why would it change now? Why would we expect to find victory even if we gather together as many troops as possible? Because God ultimately wins. So they came up with a different idea. They said, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to present ourselves in such a way to try to get Israel to make a decision to enter into a covenant with us so that we will not be defeated, because we know that if Israel enters into a covenant, that can't be changed. They knew enough about God's word to know that if Israel entered a covenant, that they couldn't stray from it. Now, Gibeon was only 25 miles from Gilgal, and it was part of the promised land. And so as they made their decision to do something different, what they decided was deception was going to be their means. And what I find amazing is how far people are willing to go to play a part to deceive people. I mean, it's laid out with great detail. They did this, they took their sandals, they took their clothes, they took their bread. They crossed all their T's and dotted all their I's. So what we need to know and be reminded of is this: our enemy, our adversary, is willing to go to great lengths to deceive us. One of Satan's tactics is to present himself or something that looks so close to the real thing and then demand an instant response. Satan sometimes comes, according to Peter, as a devouring lion in 1 Peter 5:8, but other times he comes as a deceiving serpent, 2 Corinthians 11:3. He's a counterfeit. He masquerades as the angel of light, 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 14. But what if this wasn't as much about the deception of the Gibeonites as it is on how unprepared Israel was to face deception? You see, sometimes what we do is we expect non-Christians to act like Christians. But why would they? If this world is the best that they got, why should we expect them to live a Christ-like life? It doesn't make any sense for them. We should expect them to do this type of stuff and to go to this great length to prepare for themselves. But it's the Christian that needs to be prepared. It's us who needs to live life differently. It's us who needs to be prepared not just for the battles, but how to respond and live in victory to where we won't be deceived by the world and the systems. We got to be prepared. And instant gratification will tell you this: make your decision now. You ever notice that? Now's the time. You got to do it now. A few years ago, we needed to, what happened was we looked at our main bathroom, and the tub was pitted and all that. And so we're like, I saw those ads on Facebook that you can get your one-day bathroom remodel for reasonably priced. So I invited the guy into my house. First mistake. I called him. Comes in, presents this thing. Now, our main bathroom is not very big. Like, it's not like it's a tub, a toilet, and a little sink, and that's it. Like, and a little area to just turn around, and you'll hit the towels on the thing, and And it's not very big. And the guy's like, yeah, we'll give you a great deal if you put our sign out front and if you do this and da-da-da, and we'll do it all for $35,000. I was like, you're smoking something. Can I have some? Because it is good. Like, no way, $35,000? Like, you're nuts. He's all, but if you act now, we can get it down to $20,000. And I'm like, dude, sorry, not going to happen. Well, let me see what I can do. He said if you make your decision in the next hour, I could do it for $15,000. And I'm like, why didn't you just start there? Like, you would have had a far better chance. Now I'm just going to play with your head, dude, because that's how I am. Like, I'm like, all right, this is a game. Like, I'm like, well, no, sorry, 50, that's way too much. What's the lowest you can go? And so now I'm messing with him. I'm like, I got him down to $89 or $8,900. And I'm like, sorry, I'm not going to do it. And he left angry and all this stuff. But it was the act now. And that's what instant gratification says. You must decide now. You need to act now. But you need to remember, more times than not, it's a trap. It's a trap, and you're going to regret it later. And what you're going to find is this word now is repeated like 6 times in this chapter. The second thing that we're going to see about instant gratification is that it's content with a quick look. Just a brief examination, verses 7 through 15. Then the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you dwell among us, so how can we make a covenant with you? So their first thought was, well, wait a minute, you guys might be our neighbors, right? So how do we know that, this is not a trick? But they said to Joshua, we are your servants. And Joshua said to them, who are you, and where do you come from? So they said to him, from a very far country your servants have come, because of the name of the Lord your God, for we have heard of his fame, and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon king of Heshbon, and to Og king of Bashan, who was at Ashtaroth. Therefore our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spoke to us, saying, take provision with you for the journey, and go to meet them, and say to them, we are your servants. Now, therefore, make a covenant with us. This bread of ours we took hot in our provision, for our provision from our house on the day that we departed to come to you. But now, look, it's dry and moldy. And these wineskins, which were filled with new, and see, they are torn, and our garments and our sandals have become old because of the very long journey. Now, they had it figured out, didn't they? Joshua said, how can we make a covenant with you? It's like, well, we come from a very far country. But we've heard of the fame of your God. Do you see the flattery? And who are we? Who are you? We're your servants. Oh, that sounds good. It's sounding better and better all the time. Israel's first response was to question their validity. And that's great. We should question people's motives. We should get, to find the motives behind what they're asking. And when questioned, what do we see? But these guys use flattery in response. We're your servants. We heard your God. Don't swallow the hook and the bait of flattery. It never works. Connie's grandmother thought I was Arab and warned her, don't marry one of those Arabs. I'm like, I'm Portuguese, not Arab. And I would always, when Carolyn would walk her to the apartment downstairs, I'm like, oh, I see you got your younger sister. Oh, you're so cute. Here's a quarter, and type of thing. But it must have been something about that flattery I tried to flatter her with that made her think I was an Arab and not good enough for her granddaughter. She came around a little bit later. But flattery, got to be careful of it. But there's that repetition of the word now. We're up to 3 times. Now, therefore, make a covenant. Now, look. Instant gratification can be very deceptive. They called themselves your servants, when in reality, what were they? Their enemies. They were their enemies. Now, I've met people when you've been in ministry 29 years, you meet people, all kinds of people. I get all kinds of phone calls. And everybody needs something now, just so you know. And they've introduced themselves to me, and they do it in a way, well, like we're seeking, we're really seekers. But the more I talk to them and the longer the conversation goes on, I realize, and I'm very convinced, that they're really not seekers, they're sneakers. Right? They're trying to sneak in and get what they can out of me or the church. They have no desire to be servants or to be a part of what's going on. They just want what they thought and what they think they need. And that's why this is my kind of MO for when somebody calls and says, hey, we need this and we need it right now. I tell them, you know what? I need 24 hours because I need to communicate with the elders of the church, and we need to pray for 24 hours. Call me back in 24 hours and I'll give you your answer. But I need it right now. I'm like, well, if you need it right now, then you're going to have to go somewhere else because I can't. This is my policy. This is what I do. I think twice in 29 years, somebody's called me back. Twice. It's amazing how when we slow down and seek the Lord, that God sorts it out. And notice, verse 14 now tells us where Joshua went wrong. Then the men of Israel took some of their provision, but they did not ask counsel of the Lord. So Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them and let them live. And the rulers of the congregation swore to them. So instead of seeking the Lord, they examined the provision. They took the pamphlet. They let him in the house. They were trapped. And I can honestly say that nothing good has ever come for me personally out of any decision I've made in haste. And we've all had buyer's remorse, haven't we? For that decision. And I know I'm going to totally be tempted this weekend because it's the fair weekend. And the Cutco knife gal comes to church on Sunday, the day of the fair. And I'm just, I like, for whatever reason, I covet those knives because there's something about sharp knives. And when you do a lot of grilling, and it's like, I got to have a set. And I've always said no. And I know that temptation's going to come. I know she's going to pull out that penny and cut it with the scissors. And I know I'm going to look at that. And they're going to talk to me. And I know I'm going to take the pamphlet. And I know I'm going to walk by and be like, is that really the best deal that you can give me? And I really, really hope I don't give in to the temptation to buy a full set of Cutco knives. I'm pretty sure I'm going to buy one, but I'm prepared. Now, mind you, this has taken me 13 years, so it's not necessarily a rash decision. Maybe I'm just justifying my sins. But I know it's coming. And we know temptation's going to come our way. We know that people are going to present stuff to us that are going to demand an instant response. We know that we are going to want to fulfill our desires instantly. This is why we're so angry when the overnight shipping from Amazon went by the wayside. We can no longer tap into that instant gratification. Man, we might actually have to go shopping and see people. But if you don't have time to pray, maybe you shouldn't do it. Maybe that should be our what we hold on to. But instant gratification demands a quick look. But what we're going to see next is that instant gratification has lasting consequences. Verses 16 through 23. And it happened at the end of 3 days after they had made a covenant with them that they heard that they were their neighbors who dwelt with them. Then the children of Israel journeyed and came to their city on the third day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Sherphirah, Beeroth, and Kirath Jearim. But the children of Israel did not attack them because the rulers of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord God of Israel. And all the congregation complained against the rulers. Then all the rulers said to all the congregation, "We have sworn to them by the Lord God of Israel. Now therefore, we may not touch them. This we will do to them. We will make them live, lest wrath be upon us, because of an oath which we swore to them." And the rulers said, "Let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers for all the congregation, as the rulers have promised them." Then Joshua called for them and spoke to them, saying, "Why have you deceived us, saying, 'We are very far from you,' when you dwell near us? Now, therefore, you are cursed, and none of you shall be free from being slaves, woodcutters, and water carriers for the house of God." So after 3 days, it didn't take long for the truth to come out. Boop. Whoa. Time will reveal the truth. Now at this point, Israel had a choice. What are we going to do? Are we going to break our covenant, make them our slaves, or are we going to honor it? When you're found out, when you've given in to instant gratification, you are posed with a choice. And what I want to encourage you with and let you know is this: it's never okay to cover one sin with another. It's never okay to cover one sin with another. So what did they do? They made them their servants. And you know, again, sometimes I get people say, "Well, don't you think having communion every week dumbs it down, strips it of its value?" And I said, "No, I really don't think that." I said, it's made available. People can take it if they want to. Because one of the things I believe is that when we commune with God, it gets us in the right frame of mind. I think it's a safeguard that we have available to us. Because think about it. Communion is important because if not, what we're going to do is look at the empty wineskins and dried wineskins and the moldy bread and partake in that. Where if we take of the cup on the communion table and the bread of Jesus' body, we slow down and say, "Okay, God, I need to commune with you, especially when it comes to these decisions, these desires, these pressures." And I found that when I've come to the communion table, that oftentimes I can see through the deceptions, whether they're deceptions I'm telling myself about myself, or they're the deceptions that are being told to me from somebody else, or if it's the deception that I'm trying to do something or partake in something that I shouldn't be. And unlike the wine that the world offers, the wine represented at the communion table has a sobering effect. It brings us to his place of reality. Joshua didn't seek the Lord. And notice what it did. It led to frustration and murmuring, all of which could have been avoided had he just slowed down. You see, we got to use the mind that God has given us, but we should also heed the warnings of what God recorded for us. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, we all probably memorized this when we were kids, right? "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight." Think about this. Had they sought the Lord, had they slowed down, here's probably the conclusion that they would have come to. If this group of people had been official delegates sent with what they said they were sent with, they would have had a much larger company with them. They would have had adequate supplies, including sufficient provision for their trip home. Okay? Because real ambassadors would have thrown away the dry and moldy bread because they had servants who would have baked them fresh bread. As officials, they would have packed the proper attire in order to make a good impression during their possible negotiations. Had Joshua and his leaders paused to think and pray about what they saw, they would have concluded that this whole thing was a trick. But why did the people grumble at what their leaders did? They grumbled because of what they felt they lost. They felt like because of this covenant with Gibeon, it cost them their plunder. We don't get our stuff. So now they have a choice. What are we going to do? How did they remedy the solution? How did the leaders appease the murmuring crowd? Joshua says, let's make them our servants. We'll make them work for us. And it's amazing to me because most of the commentators say, when you make a mistake, you should make your mistake work for you. And I'm thinking, that just doesn't sound right to me. Nothing about that sounds right to me. That doesn't seem to be the correct remedy to the problem. But this is why I say we should never cover one sin with another. The consequences of this instant gratification is that they lost what they felt they deserved because they made their decision now. And now their decision became what mastered them. And that's always what happens. But that's not the end. And here what I look at is I see two different groups of people. You've got the group that swallowed hook, line, and sinker. Then you have the other group that deceived everybody. And now we've got to figure out, how do we live in harmony? Because now these guys are serving these guys, and we made a covenant, and it's just a big mess. So what do we do? How do we move forward? How do we come to some resolve? And that's why I believe that the last verses 24 through 27, remind us that instant gratification is not the end of the story. Verse 24, so they answered Joshua and said, because your servants were clearly told that the Lord your God commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you, therefore we were very much afraid for our lives because of you and have done this thing. And now here we are in your hands. Do with us as seems good and right to of Israel, so that they did not kill them. So that they did not kill them. And that day Joshua made them woodcutters and water carriers for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord in the place which he would choose, even to this day. Here's what I believe. I believe that if the Gibeonites were given another chance, they would do the same thing. And I say that because I don't believe that their intent was evil. I don't believe that they went in saying, hey, I want to deceive these guys so that we can destroy them, so that we can take them over. I think they were literally terrified for their life. They were afraid. And it's amazing to me what people will do and how great lengths people will go to for self-preservation. They were afraid. And we can't lose that. We can't strip that from them. That fear was very real to them. They were real people with real fears that really didn't know how to find any hope in their hopeless situation other than come up with this plan. But yet, they hoped that the God of the Bible was who they heard that he was. They just didn't know how to go about experiencing him. Rahab, we're going to compare these two in a bit. She hid the spies and pleaded with them, and she was saved. Their response was that to save their life. And for them, serving the God of Israel was better than serving the God of the world. And they were willing for that. That's why in verse 25 that, and now here we are. They realized that this is the conclusion that was going to happen and that they had to live with it. And what I love about this is it shows us that what starts out as in fear, God would eventually redeem. And here's what I mean. In Joshua chapter 10, God overruled Joshua's mistake, and he used these people to bring victory over 5 kings at one time. In Ezra and Nehemiah, we see the Gibeonites, at that point in time they were called the Nethinims, serving in the temple. So as they come out of the, Babylonian exile, that group of Babylonian exiles, they come back to Jerusalem. They're still serving in the temple. Nethinim means this, sent ones or given ones. And these people, they were given to the task, and they did it faithful. They were faithful in their tasks. The Gibeonites found salvation in the God of Israel, just as Rahab did in chapter 2. Rahab and the Gibeonites came to the God of Israel as sinners. Rahab a harlot, the Gibeonites as liars, deceivers. Both were willing to risk the forsaking of their former associates to be counted among God's people. Both, after they found salvation through the God of Israel, had a rich history. The Gibeonites became servants at the tabernacle. Gibeon was a priestly city. The Ark of the Covenant was often found there in the days of David and Solomon, 1 Chronicles 16, verse 21. At least one of David's mighty men we know was a Gibeonite, 1 Chronicles 12, verse 4. God appeared and spoke to Solomon in Gibeah, 1 Kings 3, 4, and 5. Gibeonites were those who would come and rebuild the walls of Jerusalem with Nehemiah, in Nehemiah chapter 3 and chapter 7. Prophets such as Hananiah, the son of Azar, came from Gibeah, Jeremiah chapter 28. And what this tells me is this: the book of Joshua isn't about great things that Joshua did or failures that he made or deceptions that other people deceive people with. It's about what God can do with people who are sinners but come to him in humility and in love, trusting that God would change their story, would change their lives. It's about how God can redeem our mistakes and how God still changes lives. It shows us that Jesus can make strangers our neighbors, and he can make neighbors family. There's no evidence in the scripture that the descendants of the Gibeonites created any problems for the Jews. They didn't try to deceive. They were part of the family. It's likely that their service in the tabernacle and eventually the temple influenced them to abandon their idols and to worship God, the God of the Bible. The fact that over 500 Nethinim returned to Jerusalem after the Babylonian captivity in Ezra chapter 2 and chapter 8 suggests that they were devoted to the Lord and his house. They were committed. This would be the group of whosoevers that God loved in John 3:16. These would be the ones that he who knew no sin embraced their sin or became their sin, that they might become the righteousness of God. And even though we may stray from his table, the communion table, and forget what sin has done to Jesus, he still invites us to come and to dine and to make Jesus our daily bread, not our moldy bread. To drink from his cup, to know that he's a God of redemption, that he's a God of love, that he's a God that sees past the lies and sees the fears and the hurts and the failures of the people that he came and died for, that he might then love them. And I just want to encourage you guys with this today. Be careful of instant gratification. Don't give in. Slow down. Take time. Take a deep breath. Take a walk. Don't take the pamphlet. Don't buy the Cutco knives. Unless you have the cash and you've been planning for it. That's okay. And it's scissors, by the way, that I want, not the knives. But I'm just justifying my sins in front of you. That's okay. It's my therapy session here. But know this. It's because of the cross that Jesus can make strangers our neighbors and neighbors our family. And that is what makes all the difference, because then what we can do is we can gather together under one roof. We can commune at the table of communion with God himself as his blood and his body unifies us, overcoming our sins, overcoming our fears, overcoming our failures, and creates what he calls the family of God. And when you look around, we're kind of an eclectic family. And I love that. We're diverse, different walks of life, different gifts, different talents. But we come together unified under one God, and his name is Jesus.